The book market is filled with slop, low-effort
poppycock
that no one with half a brain would ever want to read. Even before AI, people or teams of people pumped out as much
balderdash
as they possibly could because it makes money, and that's nothing new. But AI has made making
drivel
almost effortless. As of 2022, there were about 11,000 books published to KDP every day, and it's only getting worse. Today, we can go to a free website and have it spit out basically an entire book in a matter of minutes. To put this into context, Spotify's entire catalog of music, every major song released in the last 100 years, doubled in the month that they opened the doors to AI-generated
claptrap.
That's 100 years of content.
CODSWALLOP.
In a month. Since opening the Arcanist Fantasy Publishing, a small press dedicated to sharing independently published fantasy, written by flawed but artistic and devoted humans, this problem has begged the question, how the
HOGWASH
are authors supposed to stand out amid the thousands of competitors flooding the same platforms with bullshit every day? Well, they're not. Instead of trying to play a rigged game, we indie fantasy authors can simply opt out. We can make our own game. While The Arcanist does publish to Amazon, my main strategy for selling books has been directing people to my web store that I own and operate, where readers can buy books from me and not
Tommy Rot
Bezos. This is also important because now I can actually talk with readers. Amazon doesn't give you any access to people who buy your books, but now you and I can interface. We can talk. Hi everyone, I'm James, an author, editor, and the owner of The Arcanist, an independent publisher dedicated to sharing excellent fantasy fiction. I am in no way daunted by the miserable state of the arts, because smart people looking for thoughtful fantasy to read are quickly learning that the internet, or at least algorithm-based mass storefronts, are not safe places to find thought-provoking material written by actual writers hoping to say something that matters. Today, I'm talking about sharing your work with these. They're handmade, they're out of recycled materials, and I made them. Nobody's going to hand-stitch stories written by ChatGPT. What better way to show your authentic handmade fantasy than by printing it and turning it into a book? Seriously, I'm far too excited by the simplicity of this little project, but I think stuff like this just drips with style and that rebellious rage against the machine. Before we get into it, I want to tell you about my next major project. Old Sorcery by James Callan is the latest Arcanist published novel that follows the story of 3 heroes and 1 badass necromancer captured by the machinations of the most powerful sorcerer in the wide world of Garden. It's witty and hilarious, deep and nuanced, and one of my proudest achievements as an editor and publisher. When you follow the project on BackerKit, you'll get a free ebook of the entire 2025 volume of the literary fantasy magazine. The campaign goes live in March. I hope to see you there. Several months ago, I picked up these copies of Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine and Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. These ones were published in the 80s, and obviously I was taken away by the novelty of them. We don't see stuff like this anymore. The books are so small, and I can put one in my pocket and read it on the bus. None of the stories in them really blew me away. In fact, some of them were actually pretty bad. But they were bad because they were clearly written by a writer who was still learning, and the editor saw enough potential to give them a chance. Not because it lacked soul and sincerity, and definitely not because it lacked humanity. The whole idea behind pulp fiction is that magazines like this are disposable. You read them on the bus and you throw them away. Nothing about them was meant to be cherished, or even read more than once. The paper is so cheap that it would turn to pulp if you spilled your coffee on it. It's essentially garbage, no different than the advertisements stuffed in the mailbox or the absolute bullshit flooding the internet, right? But it's not. Not anymore. While that's how we thought about stuff like this at the time, they're now a relic of a bygone era. What was once a bundle of cheap paper selling for $1 a piece or maybe less is now a treasure that's $10 a piece at a boutique antique shop. The way that society looks at things like this has fundamentally changed, because we live in a world dominated by comforts and conveniences that don't really exist. You can click a button and charge your credit card and get whatever piece of digital information you want beamed directly to your screen from space. The way we consume media is so destructive and thoughtless. But this magazine, intended to be consumed and thrown in the trash, exists in our world. It's weird and uncommon. It demands the reader acknowledges it and ponders its presence in their hands. How did it survive the decades? How did it make our way into our possession? Thus, we pay more credence to what we read in a magazine like this than anything we read on Facebook. If you want to talk more about books and what makes them great or terrible with like-minded people, consider joining the Arcanist Book Club Discord. We're starting up discussions on Arcanist books with their authors in March, and in the meantime, we've been swapping writing feedback. It's been a real chill place to hang out, so I hope to see you there. I think printing and binding your short fiction into individual volumes is such a cool idea. Just like the Pulp fiction, these are made out of cheap, non-treasured materials, printer paper and cardstock. The beige covers are from a trash scrapbook, but they're my words on the page, which were spat out of my 20-year-old laser printer, and it was my fingers stabbed and bleeding from my sloppy needlework. This is now a treasure to me, and maybe one day, someone else will find it and they'll love the novelty of this handmade, tangible item. And they'll fall in love with the words that I've hidden inside. Handing someone something like this is so much cooler than sending them a link to your blog or, giving them another ebook to add to the endless piles of ebooks they will never open. When a reader picks this up, sees the thread on the spine, the crooked cuts on the margins, they're forced to ponder it, to think about it, to handle it, to feel the grain of the paper touch their fingers, or their synapses to fire, connecting them to a memory of the last time they handled printer paper, and just how much more boring that was. And now they have to think about how neat and strange this new encounter is. I started making these books out of necessity. I really wanted to get involved with the local arts fairs where I live, but they don't really see print-on-demand novels to be valid forms of art. Even though, I spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours writing them, they were printed on big industrial printers, so they're evil. I can sell them, but only if I have something handmade to sell alongside them. So I took some time to learn a new skill, and I ended up really enjoying traditional bookbinding with needle and thread. Surely I could just staple them together and pump out 10 booklets in the time it takes me to stitch one, but that defeats the purpose. These aren't mass-produced. Each one is unique. Each one is flawed. It spends time in my hands after the story spent so much time in my brain. If you're trying to find an interesting way to stand out in the sea of authors doing the exact same thing, I urge you to consider printing out some short stories and binding them together yourself. I've been really inspired lately by magazines, new and old. An author friend of mine, DJ Tyrer, prints out short zines and sends them to people by post at cost. New Edge Sword and Sorcery has some of the best art direction I've ever seen in a magazine and has been doing gangbusters on BackerKit ever since 2022. People want this. They want something authentic. They want something that feels like the old days, but not the old days, because we're never going back to the old days. But that doesn't mean we can't do things in strange and traditional ways. It's clear that people want curated reading that comes from other people and not from the machine, which is why I'm opening up a special submission window to you. I will consider up to 3 sword and sorcery stories between 1,000 and 10,000 words for a new publication called Mordschlag. Published stories will be selected upon my editorial judgment and perhaps some guest editors, and only the best will know the sweet taste of hammermill paper. That's right, Mordschlag will be printed on 11 by 17 sheets, or maybe smaller. I'm not entirely sure if my ancient brother printer can print that big yet, but they will be hand-bound and mailed to the published authors, and the rest of them will be made for sale. For this project, I can only mail physical copies to the United States, so sorry, everybody outside of the United States. Shipping is terrible, especially when it's just a bundle of papers that'll probably get eaten alive. I don't know, maybe it wouldn't be that bad. It could, if it's small enough, I could send it like a letter. Specific submission and publication guidelines are available on a free post on my Patreon. There's no obligation to join. This submission period is open to everyone. Last week I talked about publishing sword and sorcery short fiction. Next week I'm going to talk about writing effective sword and sorcery stories. If you're new to the genre, I highly recommend sticking around and learning more about authentic fantasy if you want to get published in Mordschlag. Until then, keep writing, keep revising. Don't let the machine tell you what to like.